Hi everybody, this is Cycle Camp, and today we're going to be a little something different today. Uh, I went to the range with my newly purchased Maz 4956 rifle after having installed a special replacement firing pin that had a return spring on it to try to avoid any possible slam fires or burst fires. And wouldn't you know, in the first 10 rounds I actually had a slam fire, or what I think is a slam fire. So today I thought it would be interesting to go through the process of investigating something like this. When your gun goes off multiple times, there are a couple different things that might be causing this. You could have the traditional slam fire where the firing pin somehow gets stuck or protrudes out of the bolt and sets off another round. It could be the slippage of the sear. The trigger could slip off the sear and allow the sear to come forward when it should not. Yeah, especially if you have your gun tightened down with a really light trigger. And I thought it might be interesting to take a look at this, and let's see if we can figure out by investigation which of these we actually had. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this off with pictures, and we're going to start off with the rounds that were actually fired, the cases that I collected after we went through this. So I'm going to throw some pictures up, and we'll see if we can determine some information based on the status of the cases. To begin our investigation, let's take a look at some of the brass cartridge cases that were recovered from the field. Can you see anything different about the cases that are lined up in front of you? Take a minute and compare the strikes on the various shells. You should see that one of these shells is very different from the others. So just to make it a little easier to see, here's a pen pointing out the one that is different. And if you'll notice, there appears to be a much lighter cavity in the strike area, and there's a bulging or a protrusion where the primer case has come back into the bolt face. So the primer has, during the course of firing, the primer tried to expand, and instead of being stopped by the bolt face and the firing pin, it was able to come around the tip of the firing pin and actually into the hole in the front of the bolt case. And that's why you see the outline of the bolt face hole in the back of the primer. Here's an example of another. Here's a closer example of that. Maybe you can see it a little bit better. And just to compare, here's two together. The one on the left is a correct strike. The one on the right is the light strike. And what this does is it shows very clearly that the issue was not a double hammer strike. In other words, the gun did not actually physically fire twice from the trigger dropping the sear and letting the bolt go forward. Because if it had, all of these would have looked exactly the same. They would have all looked the same. So this light strike indicates that we're looking at some kind of a problem where the firing pin was slightly forward or came slightly forward when the when the bolt mechanism of the gun was slammed forward. Okay, so now that we've eliminated the idea of a slippage of the trigger and the sear, let's go take a look at the internals of the firearm and try to understand if there's anything we can see that's obvious about the firing pin and the spring that we had installed. So we're going to do a quick takedown. Actually, there we go. I'm going to rack the gun once to cock the hammer and get the hammer down lower. I normally do that the other way by actually pulling the hammer or pushing it down, and it's hard to do because it's got a very stiff spring on it. So again, we remove the top of the gun, and we remove the bolt return spring, and we're going to remove the bolt itself, the bolt carrier, and now the bolt. And here's our new spring, and I can feel when I open this, I can feel that the spring is bound up a little bit in the end of the bolt. You know, it pulls out kind of hard, but it is still well behind the bolt face. So what I was hoping to find here was a broken spring. I'm going to bring this camera down a little bit, and I'll have to remember to be a little quieter because I know that the way this thing works is the microphone is right inside the camera, so when I have it down, it's right in front of my face. So there doesn't appear to be any damage. The spring itself appears to be in fine shape, and it doesn't appear to, if you look at the bolt face, it comes up fine in the bolt face. It is a little long compared to other bolts that I have seen. The pin does come out quite a bit. So one of the other suggestions that I had read was to take about a 1/2 millimeter off the top of the firing pin, and that may be what we're looking at. But it certainly seems to me that if you look here, this is where the end of the spring is, where it's all the way out, and it's got quite a bit of room to go forward, and that spring really should have been keeping it out. Now, one of the things I did not do is I did not lubricate the firing pin, and that's because I was always under the impression that when you lubricate a firing pin inside a bolt carrier like this, that any garbage that gets down, gases or anything that get down inside through the hole that the bolt comes out of, accumulated here and caused the firing pin to stick. But maybe that's a mistake on my part. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly lubricate the pin. I'm going to double check and clean the bolt itself, and then I'm going to lubricate the pin and take it out and run another couple of rounds, 10 rounds through it, and see if I get the same issue. So that'll be my first part of diagnosing this. Is I will re-clean the bolt, which I had not actually cleaned when I changed this. This is just the way I got it from the dealer. So I will clean it just to make sure it is clean, and then I will lightly lubricate the pin, and we'll see if that straightens out the problem. It may just be that the bolt itself is dirty, and that was what was causing it to hang up. So we're back again. I forgot to bring my camera to the range, so sorry about that. I brought the gun back, and I had the same issue again on my very next magazine worth of rounds. On about the 5th or 6th rounds, I had another double fire. So I brought the gun back home, and the next thing that I did was I used a caliper to measure the overall length of this pin against the original pin that was in the gun. And the original pin and this pin are exactly the same size, or within the tolerances of my caliper, which is about 5/1000ths of an inch or so. They appear to be identical. So it's not a question of this was manufactured longer or not. I am really concerned though, because when I use the pin with the spring and I push it into the bolt and I pull it back out again, I can feel the spring hanging up inside. And what I believe is happening is that there's a taper inside the bolt that follows the outline of the original firing pin. And what I believe is happening is that this spring is being compressed in that taper, and occasionally it's binding the spring up, and the spring is not able to return back because the taper inside the bolt is squeezing the end of the spring and causing it not to come back. So my next experiment in diagnosing this issue is I'm going to put the original firing pin back in the gun, which I've already done actually, bring it back to the range and run another magazine through it and see whether or not I have the problem. And obviously if I have the problem, then this is a design flaw of this particular setup, and I'll be talking to the manufacturer about this spring and pin setup. And if it does have the same problem, then I'm going to look at the overall length and take the 1/2 millimeter off, like it is suggested in some of the other research that I've done. So the next thing I'm going to do is take the gun to the range and shoot it with the original pin and see if I still have the issue. Take another run with this with the pin that came with the gun. I did speak to the people that make the other firing pin. They suggested that I'm having a problem with hammer follow. We'll talk about that later if this doesn't work. Heads up. Watch your ears. Yep. Yep. So I did the same thing again, right on 7. It double tapped 7 and 8. And that's it. Hi there, it's Cycle Camp again. We got one more attempt at trying to straighten out the slam fire issue that we're having with our French MAS 4956. We've tried, let me see, 1, 2, 3 other things, and now we're on our 4th attempt. So let's take another whack at it and see what happens. Went off, that's good. We're glad the thing went off because I have filed down the firing pin about a little more than a half a millimeter, maybe closer to 3/4 of a millimeter. Still have about half the amount sticking through the bolt face. If you jam the pin against the inside the bolt, you get about half what you used to have. It was sticking out quite far before. We are using the original pin, by the way. Two, three, 4, 5. This is about where it ought to double up. 7, 8, 9, 10. Now that's the first time I've been through a magazine with this gun without having a double between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7. So I think the people that sold me the original pin, who were claiming no, it's got to be hammer follow, I really think they're wrong. I did send an email to Ian at Forgotten Weapons, and thank you very much, Ian, for responding to my email so quickly. And he said, hey, look, almost all the time we get doubling on these guns. It's almost always because of the firing pin. And he suggested I put in the kit that I had already put in, which I thought was pretty funny. So I think the deal with this is that the firing pin needs to be shaved down just a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to do the same thing to the Murray kit. And that way I'll have both the little bit shorter pin and the spring, and that ought to make it doubly safer. But hey, we got it working. It seems to be going okay, and very happy about it. Thanks a lot for watching.